Good evening, everybody. I'm Charles Schultz, and this is the Randomizer for the 29th of April, 2022. And tonight we're going to look at the term geofencing. So this is an interesting concept, and not many people are familiar with it, but it led to some fascinating games and a lot of industrial applications when it was first introduced. And it's based on GPS and GPS technology, so we're going to have some fun playing with that one. So get out your geometry hat because I'm going to play a little latitude, longitude geometry game with you here too. So first of all, let's get down to business. Schultz Laboratories, UniverseScienceCenter.com and SchultzLaboratories.com are basically hosting the world's first and most interesting virtual online educational facility. And we have many different rooms, many different galleries and exhibits containing interactive content spanning different types of science and technology subjects. And what we want is for people to sign up, become members, and help us grow. So the more information we have to present, the more work it takes to get it there. The more members we have, the more effectively we can do that. So join as a member of SchultzLaboratories.com or UniverseScienceCenter.com, and we'll expand our facilities and our interactive content. Get your Oculus, put it on, walk around in some of the galleries, just have fun with it. Share it with your kids if you're homeschooling, and if you wish to educate other people with your experiences, contact us. We can set up a gallery to display your work and a classroom from which you can teach anybody on earth who wishes to come in and join you. We have the Randomizer weekdays, every weekday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We pull a random technical term out of the hat, talk about it, discuss it, see what it's all about, and possibly even how it can make the world a little better for us. And Mondays at 9 p.m. we have our robotics classes in session, and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, be there for our fourth lesson this Monday, and we'll talk about programming robots and the logic behind them. Well, let's get down to the subject at hand, geofencing. So geofencing, geo obviously meaning the earth, and fencing is a pretty obvious term unless you're a member of the sword set. Basically, geofencing is a simple concept. Let's imagine that I pick a point on the globe and I get a latitude and a longitude for it. Now, I can get a processor, hook a GPS to it, and I can put that point into the processor. And the processor can read the GPS and know if you're at that point. More generally, it can read the coordinates from the GPS and see if you're within a mile of that point, or 50 feet of that point, or within the state that that point exists in. You can play some interesting games by geometrically laying out a set of points in a pattern like a geometric form, a circle, a polygon, a triangle. And anytime that something is within or without that zone, a little computer programming can allow a processor such as an Arduino card or a Raspberry Pi to detect whether you are in or out of that zone. So now years ago, when GPS was first getting out there to people, and people would buy like the little Garmin boxes, there was an output port on the back of your Garmin that could be read with a serial port. And one of the cool things people would do is they would make basically a locked treasure box. They would put a Garmin or some sort of GPS module in there. They would put something valuable in it, and then a little programmable processor that would recognize when you were near or within the zone that you had specified in GPS. Then you would send somebody clues, and they would work out the puzzle and travel to that point. They would find another clue, they'd go to another point. And then at the end, if they managed to successfully navigate the puzzle and solve it, when your box had reached the proper location, and this is called geocaching, the box would unlock and you could find what was inside, like a reward. So it turned into kind of a treasure hunt game, and people would travel around various areas, collecting their clues, reach the destination, the box would open, and there was the reward. Now, it's an interesting concept, and it's one that we can play games with all the time, but it turns out to have a lot of practical applications as well. Some companies, particularly vehicle rental companies or travel companies, often keep track of where their drivers are, how long they're there, whether they're in or out of a certain area. Geofencing allows you to define a zone where the vehicle can operate, and if you're out of that zone, send a warning, and if you don't return to the zone, to shut the vehicle down. Right now, many car companies place a black box in vehicles that are sold to them, and this is common with used car companies, and now it's more common with new vehicles. When you do not make your payments, the vehicle turns off because they want it to. If you rent a car and you're only supposed to stay within a certain zone, they can go to their computer, type in some coordinates, and set it, and you cannot operate that rental vehicle outside that zone. It sounds kind of sinister, but it is a means of loss control. And if you're trying to keep track of what your employees are doing, you can simply take a member of your staff who's good with IT and dedicate them to programming logs and reading them back and tracking where your employees have been driving, where they're spending your gas money, and where they're going. And this is much more common now than it has been in past times. It's just become sort of the rule of the day for many companies that deal in shipping and transport. One of the other things that shows up with geofencing is if you have a large tract of land and you have, let's say, sheep or dogs and you want them to stay on the land, you can literally put a collar on them that reads their GPS position, and if they leave the boundaries of that land, it can administer a beep or a shock and bring them back. So in many of the agricultural services, particularly livestock, geocaching has the ability to allow you to control the animals and their movement without having to have a live human present for the operation. The other thing that's very interesting, and this happened about 20 years ago when this was first becoming common, GPS in general, many people who operated large farming concerns or land management concerns would send vehicles out to do specific tasks, usually with a human operator, but in some cases, in the terms of large industrial farming, plowing and picking machines could be set to operate within a certain set of parameters, and they would automatically harvest an area or plow an area, moving back and forth using the geosensing from GPS to tell them if it was in the right area. The bonus to this is a lot of farm equipment, as you know, is quite expensive and sometimes stolen. In these cases, the device can report back to the owner where it is, and the new heist individual, the new supposed owner, cannot operate the vehicle because it's being controlled by the geofencing device. It will not activate. So geofencing is kind of an interesting concept. Now, the idea actually started earlier, unbeknownst to many, in video games. Trigger zones. If you've walked around in any of these massive video games they have, you know that if you get into a certain area, certain behaviors are triggered. And how do they do that? They define a set of coordinates around an area, and then mathematically they can determine what your coordinates are and if they fall within that zone. This is exactly the same principle as geofencing. But in games, of course, you would do something like have a trigger make a door open or a bridge drop down or something explode so you couldn't go back the way you came. So it's an interesting thought that something that originated in games and entertainment has actually been transported into the real world due to the availability of GPS and cheap hardware that understands it. So you can have a lot of fun with this too. Now imagine you have a sheet of graph paper, and this is easy for just about anybody to picture, and you pick a point on that graph paper. Let's say 5, 7. You're 5 units over, 7 units up, and you put a point, shove a pin in the graph there. Now, you want to know if something is within 2 units of that pin. So you can think about that. That's a 2-unit radius circle around the pin. So you have your pin, you have a 2-unit radius circle, and something else is on the map and you have its coordinates. How do you know if it's within that circle? Very simple. You take the coordinates of your push pin, you subtract them from the coordinates of the thing that's moving around. Now you have an x and a y value. You square the x, you square the y, and you add them together. This is the old Pythagorean theorem. When you take the square root of that, if it is 2 or less, you're within the zone. You're within that circle. If it's greater, you're outside of the circle. So you can make a simple yes-no decision on position by mathematically defining a circle around your push pin, and then if anything is within the zone, it can trigger a behavior, such as, hey, you won, you got here, or danger, get out of this area. Geofencing also has other applications. It's shown up in a lot of large shopping centers, and in the context that if you have downloaded an app on your cell phone for that particular vendor or that store, when you enter the area where their store is, it will target advertising to you on your phone. So this is one of the things that is dubious in nature. It actually has some sinister applications in some cases. People actually have been known to set geofencing traps for individuals and trick them into downloading an app on their phone and then being able to track them exactly, know where they are at a certain period of time. So, we're not going to lean on the sinister here. You just have to be aware of the fact that it does exist. But whenever you download an app for a vendor, for a particular product, for a store, it's possible that what you're doing is you're setting your cell phone up to be a receiver for their advertising when you're near a store that sells their product or when you're in that store. So just be aware of the potential for misuse there if you're not, a fan of advertising. So geofencing. If you had a chance to use geofencing for your own applications, what would they be? I mean, think about it. If you had an expensive device, such as your stereo, and you put one of these geofencing devices inside the stereo, and then you set the boundaries for the property that you live in. If somebody were to borrow that stereo or take it from you, you would know exactly where it was, number one, and it wouldn't work for them, number two. So this is an interesting technology for preventing usefulness of stolen goods. Now, another interesting thing has turned up. Digital rights management, DRM. A lot of times you'll see the term DRM and the legal implications of violating and so on. There's a lot of lawyer talk in there. But what has happened recently is companies that make power tools have run into the fact that sometimes somebody will go to the large box like Home Depot or Lowe's or one of the big stores, and they'll steal a bunch of power tools. Many of them now have geofencing devices inside them called digital rights management devices. And here's how they operate. When you buy the tool and you scan the tag, the magnetic tag in the register, the same one that the pylons say, oh, geez, you walked out without paying for something, that tag has the ability to transmit the warranty registration data to the to the vendor of the tool. Once it is registered to your name or yourself, that device is activated. Now, if you were to steal it and not activate it, the tool would be useless. And so the idea is it's supposed to prevent theft because who's going to steal a drill that doesn't work? And a lot of people aren't aware of it when they go to a flea market on a weekend or one of these places where they have, or like maybe an estate sale or a garage sale. You could be buying some hot tools. Oh yeah, my uncle bought it, didn't want it, he died. I'm just getting it ready for $30. Well, that all looks well and good, but by the time you get it home, you may discover that it was stolen and never activated, and you're unable to use the tool. So be wary of these things, because if you are going to buy a tool and it's secondhand like that, always test that it operates. If there's a serial number on it, it might be a smart thing just to see if it hasn't been locked out by digital rights management, which is, again, a geofencing term. And finally, if you wanted to control your specific activities or movement, there are a lot of applications for this. Let's say you have a large piece of property and you want to be the only person who can unlock your barn. Maybe you have some a tractor, some hose, some tools, a pump. You put a lock sensor on the door, and you put an application on your cell phone, and you get to it, and the cell phone app says, oh yes, you're in the right area, and informs a lock. Then and only then can you enter a password and open the lock or use the key. So this is a two-factor authentication. One, that you actually possess the device that says who you are, and two, you actually know the password. The security in these cases can be extremely high. And if somebody steals your phone, you obviously should have some sort of a workaround, like a code on your home computer that you could send. But the point is, by adding geofencing technology, you actually gain another level of security in many ways. On the other hand, just keep in mind, you can't send a delegate to open your door for you, because they would have to have your phone and your password. So, like everything, it's a double-edged sword. It has potential for good, and it has potential for misuse, and it has annoyance potential. I know some cases where a fellow bought a car, for instance, 2 years after he'd paid the car off, and it was a second-hand vehicle. 2 years after he paid it off, the car stopped running, and he couldn't figure out why. Took it to the dealer. It turns out that they had not deactivated the device after he had paid the vehicle off, and it had turned off on him through a clerical error. This is the downside of geofencing technology. It actually can be a major annoyance. So anyway, you can probably think of a dozen applications for this right away. It isn't difficult to do, and a lot of people who build robots have used this technology to actually use the robots to traverse large distances, such as a drone. You can program the drone with geofencing to stay within a certain area and also to go from zone to zone until it reaches some remote area. So it has some interesting applications for hobby video and other things. So if you have any questions about geofencing and GPS in general, please state them now. The floor is open. Meanwhile, I'm going to give my sales pitch once again. Go to SchultzLaboratories.com or UniverseScienceCenter.com, see our galleries, see what we're offering, sign up and become a member. Join our classes. They're easily affordable, they're a lot of fun, and we're putting a whole library of accumulated episodes, lessons, and classes together that members can get to online. So it's a great deal, it's a lot of fun, and if you really have a specific subject that you want to see in our galleries or taught, or if you run a company, then you need to train some of your employees in a specific discipline, contact us and we'll set up the gallery for it for you. So, I don't see any questions or text messages, and I'm going to assume that it's because everybody's just waiting for the weekend. It is a Friday after all. And I'm going to read my quote. And the quote is, "I lift my hands to you in prayer. I thirst for you as parched land thirsts for rain." And that's Psalms 143:6. Sorry about that. Well, I think this has been an informative lesson and one with some interesting applications. I can imagine you've got things going through your head now, just imagining what you would do with this technology. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend, and I'm glad you joined us for the randomizer. Join us live next time. Bring your questions. We'll put you on the show live. And meanwhile, enjoy your weekend. I'm Charles Schultz of the Randomizer, and make the world a better place. Thank you.